Connecting community through business, building relationships, and building Waterloo Region. 570 News proudly presents Business to Business. Here's your host, Glenn Pelletier.
Good evening. Welcome to Business, and a little bit different today. We're going to be with Ian and minus Ian McLean today.
Well, we may have him later.
Yeah, Ian McLean, President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce, joined on the show monthly by his partner in commerce, Greg DeRocher, President and CEO of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, and he's here. You're here.
I'm here, yes, thank you,
Ian is en route to Ottawa.
Yes.
His flight was delayed because he was supposed to join us in Ottawa,
Yes,
right?
he's blaming the snowbirds, but they put on a great show this weekend.
Right. So we have Greg DeRocher here as always, and you're joined by Terry Kratz, who is with the Cambridge Chamber as a board member, but he's also here for a special reason as well.
Yes, we're going to be talking a little bit with Terry later about a trip to China that the two chambers are working on, one that he's actually gone on and experienced himself. We're going to talk about that because there still are some seats left for departures in September. And he's also going to talk about some experiences traveling with the chamber movement in Brazil as well. So it's great to have Terry here.
Yeah, Terry, welcome.
Yeah,
welcome to the show. If you just want to get a little bit closer to the microphone. So you've been to China and you're going again? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, he's not going to go again. He can't put up with another
Okay, you've been.
12 days.
When were you there,
Yeah,
Terry?
I've been to China last October, and we're putting on a second trip. Kitchener Chamber and Cambridge Chamber is putting on a second trip that's leaving this fall.
Okay, that's what I thought. I thought you were going on that one again. You're not.
No.
Okay. Do you want to save the Chinese discussion for later?
Let's talk about
Okay.
that later.
We were going to be joined, and it's already turning out to be a crazy show, Greg. We were going to be joined by Richard Kuipers, who is the point man for the Manulife LPGA Classic.
I'm sure Richard is pretty busy these days.
Yeah, no kidding. We were going to chat with him about the tournaments from a business perspective.
Mm-hmm.
This is a world-class event coming to Grey Silo later this month. Mm-hmm. Goes without saying, gentlemen, that this is going to bring in a lot of money to the
Well, it's going to bring in a lot of money, Glenn. It's also about staging the region for the world. And the theme of this month's show is actually about global trade and global economics. And what better to lead it off in June with the Manulife Classic LPGA Tour, where the world's going to be focused on the region of Waterloo. We're going to have international television coverage for 4 days of the event, as I understand it. It's going to be fantastic, and it's really going to put that dot on the map of a place to do business and a place to come and see.
Yeah, apart from the obvious, bringing people in, going to restaurants, spending their money here, shopping, booking hotel rooms, it does serve a marketing purpose. I mean, there's a larger influence than merely bringing immediate revenue into the community.
I think certainly when you talk about this being the Ladies Professional Association of the world, they don't go to areas or regions that aren't bustling and hustling and have a lot of economic prosperity. And I think they wisely chose the region of Waterloo because we do have that opportunity for growth and attracting business. So I think, having the eyes of the world on here, there are also going to be industries around the world looking for great places to locate in North America to dispense their North American product and goods. And we want to make sure that the focus is keenly on the region of Waterloo.
And this is a great opportunity for corporate sponsorship.
Absolutely.
I mean, those have already been in place. Those relationships have already been established, but that's another avenue. That's another revenue stream.
Absolutely.
Some local corporations with national marketing goals are going to use this tournament to promote this.
And a lot of these tournaments too, and this tournament's going to be no exception. And it's too bad we don't have Richard here to talk about it, but they also give back to the community, to the organizations within the community that are struggling, that need help to make us a better place. And as business leaders, I know Ian, I'm speaking for Ian as well, but we're all very much concerned about the quality of life in the region because that's really what attracts business here.
No kidding. Okay, we mentioned that Ian is in the sky on his way to Ottawa. But earlier this week, he spoke to a guy he knows extremely well, one Walter McLean, Ian's father, known in these parts, I guess, primarily for his role as member of Parliament for the riding of Waterloo and the in the Mulroney administration. So I guess what we're going to do. We'll take a break here, and then we'll come back and we'll play the interview that Ian did with his father, because his father's being honored.
Absolutely, it's an amazing contribution of commitment to community that Walter has shown, and he's being honored by his fellow parliamentarians this week, and that's the reason why Ian's en route to Ottawa as well.
Yeah, Ian's being honored today, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or sorry, Walter's being honored today in Ottawa.
Yes, tonight.
Okay, so we're going to come back and chat with Walter McLean, a former member of Parliament for the riding of Waterloo, and a lot more to get to. We haven't even touched on Perrin Beatty is going to be here later in the show, and the president of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and he'll be joined by Nicholas Sarveri, who is the president of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Hungary.
Yes.
Which was a bit of an eye-opener for me. I thought it was a typo. I'm looking at Perrin Beatty, president, Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and then I see Nicholas Sarveri, president, Canadian Chamber of Commerce / Hungary.
We'll let them explain that.
Okay.
But I think we'll be speaking to Nicholas. He's in Bosnia, I believe, or Croatia.
Somewhere in Croatia.
Yes.
We're going to talk to us on his cell phone. Okay, when we come back, we're going to chat with Walter McLean as Business to Business continues on 570 News.
We'll be right back with more Business to Business. The phone lines are open. Call in with your questions at star 570, 570-2545, or toll free at 1-800-570-5715. More of Business to Business right after this on 570 News. To Business, featuring local business, solutions, and success stories, connecting community through business, here on 570 News.
Welcome back to Business. I'm Glenn Pelletier, and hosted. I'm actually more about. Am I a host or a moderator? What am I?
I think you're a timekeeper.
Yeah. I'm like I'm the Ron McLean to Greg's inner Ian. John Sherry and Ian McLean's inner Ian McLean. You guys are both a couple of Don Sherrys when you guys are on a roll. Greg DeRocher here, as always. He's the co-host of Business to Business. He is the president of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, normally joined by Ian McLean, president of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce, who's en route to Ottawa as his father is being honored tonight for his distinguished service to this country. And we're going to chat with Walter right now. Ian is going to chat with Walter right now. This is Ian in conversation with his father, Walter McLean, from earlier this week.
We're now joined by the Honourable Walter McLean, former MP for Waterloo. He served in Parliament from 1979 to 1993, representing the riding of Waterloo. During those years, he served in Brian Mulroney's cabinet as Secretary of State and then as Minister of State for Immigration. He also served on Canada's delegation to the United Nations General Assembly for 7 years and was Canada's Special Representative for Southern Africa and Commonwealth Affairs as Canada led on the issue of apartheid. But he may be best known for having survived raising 4 boys, including myself, so congratulations on that as well. This weekend, Walter will be in Ottawa to receive an award from the Canadian Association of Former Parliamentarians. The Distinguished Service Award is awarded in recognition of his years of parliamentary service, his contributions to and respect for the institution of Parliament, and his interest and activity in the promotion of education, human rights, and parliamentary democracy in Canada and abroad. So thank you for joining us today, Dad.
That's a pleasure.
So tell us about the Canadian Association of Former Parliamentarians and why you feel it's important.
Of course, many serve in Parliament for short periods, others for longer periods, but Parliament is a unique experience that gives you a tremendous view not only of your community, but of the province, the nation, and the world. And in trying to in the midst of this, you often don't have a lot of time to assess what's going on because you're busy from one crisis and one issue to another. Many parliamentarians, after they finished, really have a tremendous overview, and I've benefited greatly from the nearly 15 years I had there and my years in City Council before, and understanding not only from my training of human nature, but also structures and institutions. So former parliamentarians now, with an active parliament, have an organization. They're committed to trying to use their experience in doing public education about how the institutions are designed to work, how they can be improved, how you can come in not behind them, but really beside them to support an understanding of how government works and the importance of our democratic institutions.
Well, now, so the Distinguished Service Award, it's nominated by former members of the association itself, so it's peer nominated. So, what does that mean to you? Does that, in terms of receiving the award?
Well, I consider that a distinct honor, as I think anyone in the profession, to have your own colleagues there recognize and indicate the importance of some of the things you've worked on. I think that's a distinct honor.
Great. What do you think the importance of Perrin Beatty, the president of the Canadian Chamber, will be joining us later in the program? What do you think the importance of expanding free trade agreements, in particular the Eurozone, amongst others, is given your experience during your time? That's when the free trade agreement came in, and again the NAFTA agreement. So what do you think the importance of expanding those free trade agreements is?
Well, Canada is a very small population, even though here in southern Ontario we have, more people. The bulk of Canada is spread across a vast nation, small population in global terms, and we need to trade with other people. And early on, it was quite apparent to me that here in Waterloo region, we needed to take far more seriously, first of all, the Americans, our number one trading partner. Secondly, it's now quite transparent, but when you look back into the early 80s and even to the 90s, global think was not what it is now, given RIM and all our companies and insurance companies and universities with their international linkages. So we're now talking global, and the business of having structures put together that allow countries to talk and to support their own sectors, both business and private sectors and others.
And I think we just heard the LPGA Manulife Classics coming to town, and that's the LPGA is a global tour. So on the broad theme we're discussing today is Waterloo Region, business in the world. Waterloo Region has really changed. I think you've just touched on that over the last 20 years or so and become much more global in its perspective. As MP, how did you keep connected with the interest of the local business community, recognizing that we are a trading nation?
Well, in the early days of Waterloo riding, it included the townships, and so I was in touch regularly with Woolwich Chamber of Commerce, the Waterloo Chamber, and the Kitchener Chamber. So each of these, in those days, before they were amalgamated into the greater KW Chamber, it took both mine and my staff time because it was very important to us that we understood the issues they were facing. If you think back to the 80s, we were dealing with very high interest rates. This was crippling business. We were dealing with difficult employment times. So this was terribly important, not only to be seen to be doing it, but actually finding ways of doing it. And so through that period, as well as working with the chambers, we tried to come in behind different sectoral groups that were trying to deal with different aspects of the economy.
Now the free trade agreements, have positively have had a positive impact on small and medium-sized business and their capacity to compete globally. What are the tools that you in those days, and I think you still do some consulting with business, what are the tools that small, medium-sized enterprise should be seeking out to be able to expand their reach to global markets?
Well, one of the things that smaller and medium-sized businesses don't have is a lot of senior staff looking at opportunities. They certainly know about the amount of regulation and paper they have to fill out, and they feel encumbered by it. But quite often they don't realize that they have in government support if they decide particularly to move offshore. Secondly, there are serious issues between the provinces. So if they have products or you have things you want to deal with, we have more regulations between the provinces than we do internationally quite often. So in all of this, you need to try to get the different instruments of government working with you. And quite often, there's a lot of help available if you know how to ask. So part of my job was to introduce them to the Export Development Corporation, helping exports, the Canadian Commercial Corporation, which will help them actually stand in place and guarantee if they enter into agreements. Also to work with the business faculty at Wilfrid Laurier University and the business interests at Conestoga College to try to see that they're often consulting, that they would help do this kind of education about how government can help. We don't usually, at this time of the year, think about government in terms of filing our taxes. We don't realize that quite often there are some programs in place, if we know how to ask, that will help us if we want to trade in different parts of the world.
And you touched on interprovincial trade barriers. I mean, reading the paper yesterday or this morning to see a private member's bill that many and all parties hope to be passed that will eliminate the interprovincial trade barriers and tariffs on winemakers across the country. You know, that would be a start. But what are breaking down those interprovincial trade barriers is as important as anything else, and I guess the contradiction of us as a trading nation with free trade agreements with other countries. How do we get around that problem of the interprovincial trade barriers?
Well, often, as my dad would say, the life of a skunk is important to the skunk. Quite often, you're looking at your own backyard and getting people to look a little higher. So each province, you look and try to protect yourself. I remember when the free trade was coming in, we were very heavily lobbied by the Niagara wine interest. They said that they were going to go out of existence if free trade. It's now history and a fact that there's never been a better day on the Niagara wines. But they were very fearful that they would be subsumed by American and other interests. And they're very competitive now with Latin American, European, and American wine trading interests.
Well, thanks for taking the time, and congratulations on your receiving the Distinguished Service Award from the Canadian Association of Parliamentarians. We appreciate you taking the time. Glenn Pelletier has just whispered in my ear because he wants to get the scoop. There's a lot of people wondering whether you're going to be throwing your hat into the ring for the Conservative nomination to replace Elizabeth Whitmer. So do you have any news to share with us or break with us on this program?
I was happy to work alongside Elizabeth when she was school board chairman, and then when she was in the legislature during my years in public service here. Wish her well, and wish those who contest from all parties well here. I've been there, done that. If nominated, will not stand. If elected, will not serve.
Well, I'm sure Mum will be glad to hear that. In any event, we've been joined by Walter McLean, former MP from Waterloo. Thank you for joining us today.
Take care. God bless.
Bye-bye.
I'm sure you've had the pleasure of meeting Walter.
Yes, I have. Yes.
A very, very deserving winner of the Distinguished Parliamentarian Award, who has done so much work for people around the world. And I had the pleasure of meeting him in his home. I believe it was 1982, thereabouts. I was at that time I worked for CTV as a reporter, and I was sent to his home to do a one-on-one interview. And he got out the tea set, and it was a very elegant afternoon. I forget what we talked about.
An incredible human being.
He was an MP at the time.
And a great parliamentarian as well.
Indeed. Okay, when we come back, we're finally going to hear from Terry.
Yes.
Terry Kratz from the Cambridge Chamber, who came and went to and from China as part of the Region Goes to the World. He'll be talking about the importance of trade with China. And we're going to talk more about a combined effort on the part of yourself and the Greater KW Chamber to go back to China.
Correct.
So popular has this been that your first trip sold out. You added a second trip.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of business to be had there, right, Terry?
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to come back and talk about that as Business to Business continues on 570 News.
Business to Business, presented by 570 News. Watch the live video webcast at 570news.com. We'll return with more Business to Business, connecting community through business. Listening to Business to Business, featuring local business, solutions, and success stories, connecting community through business, here on 570 News.
Welcome back to Business on 570 News. Glenn Pelletier with Greg DeRocher. He is the president and CEO of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, normally co-hosted by his partner in crime, Ian McLean, president and CEO of the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce. Ian is en route to Ottawa, where his father, Walter McLean, will be honored for his distinguished service as a parliamentarian. And he spoke earlier in the show about Canada's global place. Speaking of distinguished parliamentarians, we have another one coming up, a former parliamentarian, Perrin Beatty, speaking from his perspective as president of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. And so we have a lot to get to. The theme of this show is the importance of connecting globally. Both the local economy connecting globally and the national and the national economy, and relationships being formed with our trading partners. And the Far East is becoming a huge player. And on that note, we are joined by Terry Kratz, who is a member of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, but he also is here to lend his perspective on a recent trip that he took.
Terry's been a bit of a guinea pig for me. I've been able to talk him into going out and trying out or testing these chamber or these business type trips that are coming out and starting to be exposed to the chamber world. Last October, Terry took a trip to China. And we are now, as a result of that, of course, his success and him, and he'll enlighten us a little bit on that, but we're running 2 trips now. We were originally only going to run one with 80 people. That sold out almost in a matter of weeks, and we added the second trip, so there are still some spots. But I think what's really important is to have Terry, from an experience perspective, maybe talk a little bit about it. Terry, I'd like to talk about that program. We're working at, you've been at both the Cambridge and the Greater KW Chambers information nights on it. We have 2 trips scheduled for the 5th and the 15th of September. You went on it last October for $2,299. Is it not a bad trip to go on?
Well, Greg, as you know, I'm a full-time accountant, and I have yet to figure out how the trip provider, SitsLink out of California, does it for that value. We were there for 8 days. It covered the cost of the air flight. It covered all your hotel rooms in 4 or 5-star hotels in 2 or 3 cities, and your meals and admissions to a number of different things that we saw over there. So I would encourage, in terms of the value side, that you're not going to find a better value to go to China if you're interested.
So how did you find the country from that perspective? I think your one comment to me when you came back was, what an incredible education.
Well, Greg, I think my first comment was, yes, I really did feel like a guinea pig when I spent 14 hours on an airplane and got off about 7 or 8 o'clock in this monstrous Beijing airport, and I'm walking for about 15 minutes hoping that there's going to be somebody at the end of the line to meet me with a sign that says, yes, I'm with the chamber group.
I have a sense of humor, but I wouldn't do that to you, Terry.
Anyway, the trip itself, we call it the trip to China. These trips for chambers in the U.S., there's about 7,000 chambers in the U.S., and they've been doing a number of trips to various destinations because, as we know, the world is a global place now. And these trips are really opportunities to learn about a country's culture, learn about their history in a very controlled manner. You're over there and you're on a bus for most of the time. You have guides that are licensed in China, and they know a lot about the country and its history, and you can ask any question you want. And so it was really an incredible learning experience. We saw a number of things that you would expect to see. A highlight for me, I was looking forward to see the Wall of China, and we spent half a day there. I got to climb all over it and up to the closest tower I could find. We took a canal ride on the famous Grand Canal that they built 1,000 years ago. We saw some acrobatic shows. But we also had a number of other business meetings, too, that we met some other people.
And then just most recently, you came back from Brazil, where you went down to Rio, I believe, and where else did you?
Well, we started in Rio, and then we went to Sao Paulo, which is really the New York City of South America. Again, met a few business people there, saw some of the sites, and you really come back with a much better understanding of these countries. And again, I would call it kind of for a business person a primer to learn about the country. If you're interested at all in doing business, it's not necessarily a pure trade mission. About 80% of the time you spend seeing things, learning culture, and 10-15% maybe being with other business people. But it really is an opportunity to see a country, learn about its culture, and so when you want to take that next step, you feel a little bit more confident that at this point in time, yes, I could get on a plane to China and go on my own and do what I wanted to do over in China after being over there the first time. So it's a confidence builder, or let's call them business primers to other countries.
Guys, let me ask you this: among those who go on these trips, I mean, give us a snapshot of the types of people that are taking advantage of these. Because you mentioned it's not all business. In fact, there's a lot of tourist activity involved in this.
Yeah, the trips that I went on, Glenn, were trips that had a lot of chamber executives from, say, North America, a fair number of people from the U.S. actually. The trips that we're offering here, my understanding is there's some business people and there's some people that just want to see China in kind of a very controlled, economical way. And
so if you are a business person who wants to make inroads there, is that part of the experience? Is it built into the experience, or are you kind of left on your own to find your way?
There will be parts of the trip that will help. Okay. But again, most of it is a business primer, I think, to learn about China, its culture and history. And we'll have some parts that will help.
These are programs that we're starting to offer in conjunction with the Greater KW Chamber to try and give exposure to our members to the world and some smaller business people who maybe don't have either the funds or the courage to go out there on their own and look at it. So they're going in a group setting. You're going with like-minded individuals who are business people from the local community, learning about the culture and seeing if your business model fits with their business model. And then the next step, obviously, would be to either go there by yourself or with a group of individuals to say, we want to sit down at the table with individuals to do business. So we're looking at trips to Dubai. We're looking at trips to India, Europe, Brazil as well. And of course, keeping that China connection as long as we possibly can.
Okay, guys, if there's somebody listening right now who wants to get involved in this next trip to China, how do they go about it?
Well, they can contact either one of the chambers of commerce on our websites, greaterkwchamber.com or cambridgechamber.com, and you can find all the contact details there. Or you can just get a hold of the Chamber of Commerce, and we'll give you a direction on how to get there. I believe there's about 30 or 35 spots maybe left out of the 80 that originally were set for September the 5th.
All right. So there are two trips in September. The first one's sold out.
Yes.
Speaks volumes about the popularity of it. You've added a second one, and there are 30 seats left.
Yes, and Terry went...
Both in September.
Yes.
Both in September.
Terry mentioned that he went on the 8-day trip. These ones that we have scheduled are 12 and 11-day trips.
Okay. Anything more you want to add about that before we kind of move on? And
just for people from Waterloo Region, I was there in October, and I know our trips aren't going this year in October, but believe it or not, I noticed across the street from where we were staying that there was a sign, something about Oktoberfest. And so believe it or not, I walked across the street. It was a shopping center called Lufthansa Center. And in the basement, yes, in Beijing, they were celebrating Oktoberfest. Mind you, it was a little different than we celebrate it here. I've never seen a chicken dance like I saw there, but it was a great experience.
I think you said the beer wasn't too bad, too, Terry.
Chinese beer we did have a fair bit of it. We were over there. It's on the bus. It's at every meal you have.
Was it Qingtao you were drinking?
Yes.
Qingtao, yeah. It's got a nice
fruity
flavor. So I've been told. Okay. You want to bring in Mr. Beatty?
Absolutely.
Oh, well, what a pleasure. Greg, take it away.
Perrin, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and your weekend, of course, with your family to come and join us. And I first of all want to congratulate you on your FIT Award.
Thanks very much, Greg. I appreciate it very much.
For those of you who don't know out there, the Forum for International Trade and Training honored certainly Perrin and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and more particularly Perrin Beatty, for his work on exploring opportunities outside of Canada for Canadian businesses. How important is it, Perrin, that we set that stage for SMEs to get on the global stage of trade?
It's absolutely critical, Greg. You were talking about China a few minutes ago. Either we can go to see China or else China's coming here to see us. The simple fact is that in today's world, when your customer, your competitor, your supplier, your partner can be on the other side of the world but as close as a mouse click, then you realize you're in the global economy. Mm-hmm. And it means then that increasingly Canadian businesses of all sizes need to look beyond our borders.
I know Nick Savary is here from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Hungary as well. Nick, welcome to the program as well. How are you? Do we have Nick? Nick is here, I think.
We'll get him.
Anyway, I know Nick.
Okay, here's Nicholas. He's actually. We tested the line earlier. Yeah. He is a member. He's the president of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Hungary. He happens to be in Croatia right now.
Yes. I knew there was going to be a bit of a delay. Welcome, Nick. How are you?
Good to hear you all. How are you doing?
Very good. I know, Perrin, Nick is going to want to weigh in on this too, but you co-authored an article recently with Jürgen Thumann, president of Business Europe, titled "Build a Bridge Across the Atlantic," where you were talking about redoubling the efforts to reach a Canada-Europe union in the form of a comprehensive economic trade agreement. How important is this to Canadian businesses, and for that fact, maybe from Nicholas's perspective, the European businesses, to get to work on our economy?
From the perspective of Canadian businesses, Greg, the federal government did a study in cooperation with the EU that suggested that we could increase trade with Europe by about 20%, or about $12 billion of economic growth per year. So this is very significant. Mm-hmm. It's clearly our most important trading partner is the United States. It's going to continue to be. About 70% of what we sell goes to the United States, but increasingly people are looking beyond our borders, and a market that is certainly accessible for us, we can reach this agreement, as Europe.
Nicholas, have you got comments on that?
Absolutely. I completely concur with that view. In fact, one of the most important elements is mitigating risk, and the way to do it is to be able to stand on more than one leg. Trade with the United States is extremely important for Canada, but looking for other markets that are a little bit closer to home, in fact, than China or perhaps the further eastern countries, would be something that Canadians, especially on the eastern side of Canada, would find a little bit more easy to work with. And the free trade agreement actually does give an opportunity to a particularly important sector, which our members, particularly, I think, would agree, and that is the small and medium-sized companies that really are looking for partners to look beyond just the markets in Europe. New products, new opportunities to come in this direction, but also to take in the direction of North America and Canada.
You are listening to Business on 570 News. In conversation with Nicholas Savary. He is the president of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Hungary. Also in conversation with the Honourable Perrin Beatty, president and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. And they're talking to Greg DeRocher. He's the host of Business. He is the president of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. A lot of chambers of commerces being represented.
Yes, a lot of chambers of commerce.
Commerce.
Terry Kratz and I, and gentleman Terry Kratz is the treasurer of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, does all my travel stuff for me that I don't want to do and that I'm a little afraid of, but he wants to jump in because we had a conversation about this and about his experiences with going to China and going to Brazil. And Terry, maybe we want to ask Perrin that question.
Yes, Perrin. When I was both in China and Brazil, we met with the American Chamber and the representatives in Beijing, Shanghai, and Rio, and we found that experience to be really helpful. And I think for small, medium-sized businesses in Canada, the ability to reach out to local people in local markets is something that would help them a lot. And just wondering, the Canadian Chamber, does it have some offices overseas, and how accessible is it to a small business owner that perhaps wants to do some business in Brazil?
We don't ourselves. We differ from the U.S. Chamber in that the U.S. AmChams around the world are directly connected with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. But what we are looking at is how we can develop new ties with Canadian Chambers of Commerce abroad, because it's very clear that they're interested in having a connection to Canada, and increasingly Canadian businesses going abroad see an infrastructure there for them. I literally just got back from Brazil as well. I was in Brazil, Barbados, and Trinidad and Tobago with the Governor General just 3 or 4 weeks ago. And there is a Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce, for example, and the Canadian business community in Brazil, just as the Canadian business community in other parts of the world as well, are very, very keen on seeing more Canadians be there, and they're keen on reaching out and saying, how can we help out?
Perrin, I guess it concerns me a little bit when I read your article a few weeks ago back in the Ottawa Citizen about this. We have NAFTA in our hip pocket. We've gone through those hurdles. We've developed a comprehensive trade agreement in North America. Shouldn't this be easy now to develop these new trade agreements? And I think we've heard from Nick, who is a Hungarian businessman, but also representing Canadian businesses over there. There's obviously some interest there. These two, certainly from a business perspective, our two sides are synced. What's the matter politically?
We need to do it. The problem, though, Greg, is that we have fallen behind. I was in Chile, I guess 4 years ago or 5 years ago, where they were about to celebrate the anniversary of the Canada-Chile Free Trade Agreement, and they said to me, well, we want to thank you, Canadians, because you were the ones who taught us about free trade. Our first one was with you. Since then, the Chileans have reached about 40 free trade agreements.
Yeah.
Canada has 10 or 11. Most of them fairly small, with the exception of NAFTA. But we have a large number underway. We're in negotiation with Europe right now. We are asking to be included at the table at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a major negotiation. We are in early negotiations with China, with Japan, and with India as well, in addition to CARICOM and also Mercosur and a number of others. So the real challenge at this point is that for the talented trade staff that we have in Ottawa, in the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, they're being stretched very thin at this point.
Well, we have an agreement with some of our clients to mention them. We're going to do that right now. Hang on, gentlemen. We're with Perrin Beatty, the Honourable Perrin Beatty. You may know him in these parts. He was a long-serving member of Parliament for the Conservatives. He's now President and CEO of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. We're joined as well by Nicholas Sarveri, President of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Hungary. We're going to come back as Business to Business continues on 570 News.
We'll be right back with more Business to Business. The phone lines are open. Call in with your questions at star 570, 570-2545, or toll free at 1-800-570-5715. More of Business to Business right after this on 570 News. Listening to Business, featuring local business, solutions, and success stories, connecting community through business, here on 570 News.
And welcome back. Let's get right back to it, because we have one distinguished gentleman on the line from Croatia. That is Nicholas Sarveri, President of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Hungary, and Perrin Beatty, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. We're talking about the importance of global trade, and take it away. Greg DeRocher, President of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. He is joined by Terry Kratz, a Cambridge Chamber member who just got back from a trip to China. So let's keep this theme going. Greg and Terry, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I guess we all know the importance of the nature of what we need to do in terms of encouraging Canadian business to move overseas and start trading outside their comfort zone of the U.S. In fact, I had just read an article in the Globe yesterday about how small, medium-sized businesses, especially small businesses, find it very hard to move beyond our borders. I think they said in Canada there's about 1 million small businesses of less than, say, 100 employees. And of those businesses, there were relatively few that had really been successful in looking at trade to China, trade to Brazil, or trade to Europe. And I think one of our critical success factors is somehow taking the risk out of that leap of faith and investing in overseas market. I'd be interested in your comments in What advice should we be given to smaller companies of less than 100 employees to make that leap?
Most small businesses that are exporting by selling parts or selling services to larger companies that have the resources to develop international markets. If you're an SME looking at going abroad yourself outside of North America, the key thing is to do your homework first. In a number of markets, you're going to be required to prime the pump for 2 or 3 years before you're actually going to see a return. This was very apparent to me when I was in Brazil, and where it's very important that you develop local contacts. Of course, the language spoken is Portuguese. The market is quite different. The tax system is entirely different from Canada's, and the governmental processes can be quite sclerotic sometimes. For many SMEs, this makes it very, very difficult because it puts a real barrier to entry, and it's easier for a larger company. So choosing your market, making sure that you've done your homework, having a local partner, having resources such as the Trade Commissioner Service or Export Development Canada or the Canadian Commercial Corporation helping you out, all of these can be critical.
Nicholas, you must face some of the same anxieties from some of the businesses in your market as well.
No, we do actually. Being a Canadian myself and having worked now overseas for the better part of the last 15 years, we've seen things change quite a bit. And there's an openness in markets. In Europe, especially on the eastern side of Europe, where we've got transition economies that have recently returned to Europe, there is now an openness for trade with Canada. But I have to say that, Canadians have a hard time understanding what goes on overseas. But something, one of the important elements is that, the foreign commercial service and Export Development Canada also need the help. They need the local partners. And one thing Canada has, which I think many of our other competitors don't have, is the diaspora, those that have ended up in Canada and returned to the countries that they came from originally and have a very good local knowledge. Interestingly, the Canadian Chambers of Commerce, like ours, were formed by individuals that have returned or had returned. And our chamber is now 20 years old. It was formed in 93 by Canadians working in Hungary. And to this day, if they find out, if somebody coming to Hungary finds out about the Canadian Chamber, they do contact us and ask for the advice. What we don't have is a good mesh between those kinds of organizations, which there are many of, with the Canadian official government organizations like those mentioned tonight, that really would be very helpful. It's always very informal. And I would raise that other countries like Germany and France, for example, actually do very, very directly try and put chambers of commerce on the ground in the countries where their economic interests lie. Now, Canadians don't do that yet. We think actually not that that's the route to take necessarily, but there should be some method to collect those organizations that have organically grown. Our Chamber of Commerce was simply formed by a bunch of businesses, not by any directive coming from the Canadian government. Many businesses going abroad actually will rely on things like email and Facebook and somebody they met online or some interest that came up through an informal conversation, and not a formal invitation or not a formal look at what's going on in a given economy. So therefore, the social networking sometimes takes the place of good due diligence. Mm-hmm. Yet good due diligence should involve people on the ground that know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And these chambers of commerce, not just the Hungarian, but I could mention the British Canadian Chamber of Commerce or the Korean Canadian Chamber of Commerce, all organizations which exist because of Canadians that have already taken the step, are there and have a wealth of information for Canadians that are interested to find out what it's like to do business in that country.
Perrin, what are your comments on that? From the head of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, should we all be working closely together with these Canadian chambers around the world?
I think we should be working as closely as possible. The mandate of the Canadian Chamber has historically been policy as opposed to programs. So we're involved in trade policy as opposed to trade promotion. But increasingly what we're looking at is, does it make sense for us to develop a network with Canadian chambers abroad where we can work more closely and provide information to those chambers about what's taking place in Canada, but also where it'll be a help if people from Cambridge are going to Singapore, for example, that they could meet with people from the Singapore, Canada Chamber of Commerce. When I was there last fall, members of that Chamber of Commerce said, look, if there are Canadians coming out, we want to do everything we can to assist them and show them how to make their way down the road and help them understand what the rules are and where the opportunities are. So it makes good sense for us to work together, both with local chambers and also with government.
Mr. Beattie and Nicholas, thank you so much for your time. We could talk forever.
What a great conversation. This is terrific.
And for me, a personal pleasure as a student of Canadian political history. Perrin Beattie was elected to the House of Commons at the age of 22. He was the youngest ever person appointed a cabinet minister.
He still looks the same.
By Joe Clark in 1979. Were you yet 29, or were you about to turn 29?
I had just turned 29, and I hate to tell you how many birthdays there have been since then.
Well, you served the country well, and you're continuing to serve the country well in your capacity as president of the Cambridge Chamber. Thank you for your time. And Nicholas Sarvarin, thank you very much for joining us from Croatia today and serving to talk to us in your role as president of the Canadian Chamber in Hungary. I know it sounds confusing. That's his title, yes. Canadian Chamber in Hungary, but he's in Croatia on business. Yes. Thanks, gentlemen. Okay, we have about a minute and a half to go. Gentlemen, let's take it away. Wrap it up. Anything you guys want to talk about?
Well, yes. Unfortunately, I just got a BBM from Ian McLean. He just landed.
Great.
He said,
great, Ian. You got 30 seconds. Go.
Is the show over yet? Can I call? And I said, no, it's okay. I'll give him a call afterwards. But he did want me to remind folks out there about their 100-mile feast on June the 11th. And on June 8th, their point of view luncheon is Imperial discussing oil sands and large energy projects. And, of course, the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce has their golf tournament coming up on June 11th, and we're looking forward to a great day.
And Terry Kratz, Cambridge Chamber, you're welcome back anytime. I'm going to speak. I mean, you were great.
Oh,
come on
fantastic.
Back.
For an accountant, he's got personality plus. It's just unbelievable.
Thank you so much
for
coming up, Terry. Really enjoyed it. That's Terry Kratz with the Cambridge Chamber. Greg DeRocher will be back next month when Business to Business continues, joined by Ian McLean, president of the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce. Thanks to Liz Russell for producing, along with Karen Drake. You've been listening to Business on 570 News.
Business to Business, presented by 570 News. Watch the live video webcast at 570news.com. We'll return with more Business to Business, connecting community through business.
We just retired, and we're looking forward